Okay, so blade grip arms built, and this is how they should look. With the mixer arm on the outside of the grip. Alright, if you got that all right, you're good to go. Now, my grips came with the regular bearings already installed into the grips. Okay, the only thing that wasn't installed was the spacer. The spacer came with the spacer came with the blade grip bolts. Do not forget these spacers. Alright, they go in before the thrust bearings, okay? Then you have your thrust bearings. Now, I've shot this kind of stuff a million times, but I show it in every video because you never know if you don't want someone to go watch another helicopter build to get it right. So, the thrust bearings go on, and you need to make sure that the thrust bearings are on properly. I haven't opened the other one yet. I suggest you don't do that so you don't mix them up. But one thrust bearing has a very loose fit on the feathering shaft or spindle. The other one has a tight fit, okay? The loose fitting one goes on first, followed by the bearing race, and then the tight fitting one. Okay, so now the way I like to put my bearing race, you'll notice one side is open, shows all the balls. This is where you're going to pack the grease, and the other side's closed. I like to put the thrust bearings on in such a way so that cupped or open side is toward the center of the head. This way, centrifugal force does not throw the grease out of the thrust bearing. If you had it this way, it's much easier for it to throw the grease out. That's just the way I like to do it. All right, and then this one goes on here, and then of course your bolt and washer. Now, what you got to do is you got to pack these with grease. So I'm going to go ahead and pack these with grease, and we'll come back and continue. Okay, so here we are. Make sure you got your spindle out, your bearings greased. Okay, I've got them separated so I don't mix them up. Your spacers, your spindle screws, and the dampeners. Now, for the dampeners, I'm going to go with the black, which is harder than the red. All right, if you're new and you're going to run a low head speed, you want to go with the red because you might get a wobble in the hover. All right, tight dampening and low head speed can do that. I'm going to go with the black myself. Bear with, phone's ringing, be right back. Okay, answered the phone, I'm back. Okay, so we've got all our stuff ready, and the way we're going to do this is pretty simple. Now, by the way, I want to make a comment. I'd seen some posts recently about how I put spindles together and how you tighten screws, and I want to say something. The spindle screw or the feathering shaft screw should always be tight against the spindle. I saw some posts where some people are talking about backing this off to allow adjustment for the dampers or not destroy the dampers. That's BS. The design of a helicopter is the spindle screws should be tight. They're torque specs on screws going into metal. Always should be tight, okay? Regardless of how tight you might see me do it on video, I feel how tight that is. I don't care what it looks like. The bottom line is don't over-tighten, obviously. Be reasonable on it. But the bottom line is you never back off a spindle screw if your dampeners feel tight, okay? That's totally ridiculous, all right? So I wanted to clear that up. Anyway, so we're going to get this ready. And what we're going to do on this spindle, now this spindle has a design that has a shoulder, so it's pretty easy to do. You're going to put your loose one on, make sure the race or groove is up. All right, we've got our pre-greased bearing. Make sure the open side of the bearing is going toward the center of the spindle or feathering shaft. And then, of course, the tight one with the groove on the bearing. Pretty straightforward. Now, when you did that, make sure you didn't get grease down in the spindle. Super important. All right, then you're going to take your wrench, put some Loctite. Now, you kind of want to work Loctite. You know, I'm not sure how long it takes to dry up. All right, but Loctite, what you don't want to do is put this on and then come back a day later and assemble the rest of it because you want this stuff to tighten up. So I'm going to hand tighten this as best as I can now. All right, so then don't forget the spacer. Super important. Drop that in the grip. Okay, get it straight down in the grip. Go ahead and put your spindle in on one side. All right, so now there's a couple ways you can do this, but this is the way I'm going to do it. Now, I don't usually like to grease my dampeners, even though the manual says to do that. I don't think there's a reason to do that. I'm finding that this goes in pretty easily. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fit my damper in the head now. Then don't forget the brass spacer, all right? And then what I'm going to do is put the tool on the screw and go ahead and turn the spindle as I go in. Alright, so there we go. We've got one grip on. Now we want to do the other one. Again, don't leave this sit overnight and do it later. But what you're going to do now is you're going to fit the damper in. Alright, and it's pretty straightforward. Okay, don't let it get crushed or torn as you're putting it in. If you do want to put a little grease on here to do it, go ahead. But you should be able to fit that in. I'm just going to push lightly with a tool. Again, you don't want to carve it up or make marks on it. Okay, and just kind of seat it in. Okay, if you want, what you can do also is back the spindle out. Okay, and while holding the damper, push it in. Okay. Alright. Alright, put your spacer on. Don't forget your brass spacer. Alright, now the difference is you can do this two ways. You can drop the bearing spacer in the grip. Alright, check your bearings to make sure you have them right. And I'm going to assemble it this way. So that was the loose one, right? So I'm going to put it on the table. And this was the open, greased portion. And then the tighter one, double check it, make sure you didn't get a bad thrust bearing. Alright, drop the grip on. Whoops, lost the spacer, 1 second. Drop the grip on. Make sure you have them on the right direction. Outrage should be up, because once these are in, you can't switch them around because of this grip design. Okay, so make sure it's on. Then go ahead and use a tool and drop the thrust bearings in. Okay, pretty straightforward. Work them onto the spindle. Not too difficult. If you want, back the grip off. Get them down in the head. And I'm having a little difficulty getting that in there. 1 second. There we go. Put the grip back on. Again, make sure the outrage is facing up. Okay. Okay, down onto the bearing. Make sure it looks all seated in there now before you put the next spindle screw in, or feathering shaft screw. Okay, washer. Loctite. Again, don't make a mess out of this. Even though you've cleaned it off and it's in the threads, it can still squeegee. You don't want to get it in the thrust bearings. Alright? Now again, you want to make sure these are tight. This has nothing to do with adjusting your dampener or damper tightness, okay? You don't back these off. But also, don't be ridiculous, tighten it and overstress the screw. These have a very high torque value actually, and I doubt with hand tools like this you can over torque the screws. But tighten that thing up. Make sure it's seated. Alright? Again, I doubt very seriously with a tool like this you can reach the max torque on those screws. Anyway, when you're done, make sure everything goes freely. Now sometimes the spindle can be biased one way or the other. Make one grip tight. If that's the case, go to the loose side, put your tool in, go in the direction of tightening, and push while you tighten. But needless to say, as you can see, mine's really free. Alright, so that's what you want to do, and that's where you want to be done. Outrage on the top, grips all in a line, everything together. Got your brass spacers, got your spacers between the thrust bearings and the radial bearings. Spindle screws nice and tight. Alright, so that finishes the head build. We'll come back now to the previous steps in my next segment and do this fly bar cage and everything else.